Hello, my name is Ashley Pignon, and this is my Teach Me project for Anatomy 231. For this project, I decided to focus on the vertebral column, and I hope you find this video helpful for our upcoming practicum. Now let's get started. So why is this structure important? The vertebral column is important because it houses the spinal cord within the vertebral cavity. It distributes weight to lower limbs, provides support to the head. It allows for attachment of muscles and ligaments. It facilitates movement and stability. The vertebral column is made of 33 bones in youth, and around 9 bones at the terminal end fuse together in adulthood and form into 2 larger bones, the sacrum and the coccyx bones. And an interesting fact, did you know there are 13.5 million neurons in the spinal cord? Anatomists broke the vertebral column down to 5 major regions. The first, in red, is the cervical, also known as C1 through C7. And a way to remember this is 7 cervical vertebrae. Both start with S. There are 12 thoracic vertebrae, also known as T1 through T12. These vertebrae articulate with the 12 pairs of ribs. And another way to remember this is 12 thoracic. Both start with T. Next, there are 5 lumbar vertebrae, known as L1 through L5. These bones are larger and thicker than the cervical and thoracic because it allows them to support the weight of the upper body. Next, the sacrum is composed of 5 fused sacral vertebrae, known as S1 through S5. This part of the column articulates with the pelvic bones laterally. And finally, the coccyx bone, which consists of 3 to 5 fused coccygeal vertebrae. So the vertebral column makes 26 bones in total. Let me give you some time to look at this slide. As you can see here, there are very distinct similarities and differences within these 3 different regions, and that I will get more in depth later on in this project. And here are some general terms. Intervertebral disc. There are 23 intervertebral discs that act to separate, anchor, and provide cushion to each vertebrae. There are no intervertebral discs found between C1, the atlas, and C2, the axis, or between the sacrum and coccyx bones. Inside the intervertebral disc, the intervertebral disc contains of 2 main parts, the nucleus pulposus and the annulus fibrosus. The nucleus pulposus is described as a gel-like center of the intervertebral disc that is composed as a mixture of water, collagen, and proteoglycans. The annulus fibrosus surrounds the nucleus pulposus in a series of ring fibrocartilage, which is what annulus means. The body of the vertebrae is the large cylindrical part located anteriorly that gives strength to the spine. The superior and inferior articular facet So our vertebrae need to articulate with the vertebrae above it and the vertebrae below it. And it does so by the articular processes that are found above and below of each vertebrae. The transverse the transverse project the transverse process are projections of the bone, and there are two transverse processes located on both sides. Similar to the transverse process is the spinous process. And there is only one spinous process located on the posterior side of the vertebrae. Next, we have a network of connections, which is the pedicle and the lamina. The pedicle is located on the left side of this slide, and there is one on each side of the foramen. That is the hole that is inside of the vertebral column. Let me see if I can point that out for you. Next, we have the pedicle and the lamina, which is a network of connections. The pedicle, which is on the left side, is the one where there's two highlights on both sides. This structure basically connects the vertebral body to the transverse process. And over here on the right, we have the green highlighted in the middle, and that is known as the lamina. And the lamina works to connect the transverse process with the spinous process. Intervertebral foramen and intervertebral canal. The purpose is to protect and support the spinal cord and also bear the majority of the weight put upon the spine. And each intervertebral foramen gives passage to a spinal nerve and spinal blood vessels. And this pretty much wraps up the general terms for the vertebral column. The first two vertebrae in the cervical spine is C1 and C2, that are also called the atlas and the axis. Support to the head. It allows us to move our head up and down in a, like if you're saying yes. And C2 has a projection known as the dens coming from it that allows us to move our head right and left, as in to no. The transverse foramina is the picture located on the left, and basically the foramina is openings in the transverse process of the cervical vertebrae that allow the vertebral artery and vein to pass through. And this is the only section in the vertebral column that has the transverse foramina. Next is the bifid spinous process, which is a spinous process that splits into two, the two distal parts of the bone, and it's a unique feature that is found in the cervical vertebrae. Next we have the thoracic region, which is T1 through T12. The superior and inferior costal facet are 2 points on the sides of the thoracic vertebrae where the ribs connect. The superior costal facet is located on the inferior thoracic vertebrae. This facet joins the rib to the top of the vertebrae. And The inferior costal facet is located on the superior vertebrae. This facet joins the rib to the lower part of the vertebrae. And a funny way of distinguishing what bone this bone kind of looks like a giraffe. So if you see a bone that looks like a giraffe, then it must be thoracic. The lumbar region, also known as L1 through L5. These are known as the lower back area of the spine that extends from below the rib cage to the sacrum. And as I mentioned in the thoracic region, how to identify a thoracic is by it looking like a giraffe. Well, the lumbar has a similar animal feature, and it kind of looks like a moose from the lateral view. So that's how you can tell if it's lumbar. Next we have the cervical vertebrae, and it is represented by segments S1 through S5 and located between the lumbar vertebrae and the coccyx. The median sacral crest forms from the fusion of the first three sacral spinous processes and serves as the attachment point for the supraspinous ligament, and it is on the posterior view. Sacral canal. The sacral canal is a hollow space that runs from the base of the apex. The sacral canal serves as a channel at the end of the spinal cord. Now we have the posterior and anterior sacral foramina. I have highlighted the posterior foramina in green and the anterior foramina in red. The sacrum contains 4 pairs of foramina, and these foramina allow for spinal nerves to pass through. And finally we have the coccyx, also known as the tailbone, and it is the final part of the spine located below the sacrum in the lower back. It's a small triangular bone made up of 3 to 5 fused vertebrae and held together by ligaments and joints. I know some people say that there is no function of the coccyx, but I read that it is, like I said, a site of attachment for muscles and ligaments for the pelvic floor to support the position of the anus and to prevent weight-bearing support to a person in a seated position. And that is the end of my presentation. I hope you learned a lot from it, and I thank you for listening to it.